Okay, I think we're streaming. I always like to open up YouTube Studio just in case to check that it's all working fine. So just give me a quick second. And in this video, I want to talk about something that I've been working on. Well, something I'm going to be working on. I've actually been looking for a house recently, and it's just eaten up so much of my time. So I haven't had time to do any videos, haven't had time to talk about stuff. We decided not to buy a house in the end anyway. So we're staying on Cuchimudlo Island, which is where I am right now. Yeah, so I'm back and I'll be able to do some more view related stuff. Actually, part of this quick update, I'm going to view Germany this year. I mean, everything hasn't been finalized. I'm kind of just waiting for one last email to confirm, but it looks like, yeah, I'm going to be going to view Germany to talk about quasar related stuff if all of that works out, which would be really cool. I hope I'm allowed to say that. I assume I am because a lot of people have sort of already mentioned on their website. But yeah, if that works out, then that'll probably actually that will be my first ever live on stage talk. I've done a lot of talks online, but living in Australia, there's not a lot of view related talks that you can do in Australia, so it just hasn't really happened. Yeah. So anyway, the package that I'm currently working on is something called VueAction, and I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what the code's going to look like for that because I think it's a really cool concept. So one of the first things is you'll need to install it. And I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of what that might look like and then what it might look like to actually use it. And what VueAction is it tries to cover some of the stuff that isn't covered by like sort of a model API or an ORM API. So you know how usually you got your APIs where you can update a post or update a comment, and you might have your your CRUD operations and then all of your includes. I built Vue Model, and Vue Model is basically designed to handle that problem. But there are still API calls that you'll need to make that don't fit that paradigm. So it's really cool to have this paradigm because it means you can very quickly build applications, and it's very easy for new people to understand how to work with your API and to build applications with your framework. The problem is, though, the stuff that doesn't fit that paradigm. And a classic example of that is changing a password. So when you change a password, usually you're not going to be you're not going to be using an ORM endpoint. So I've seen some projects try and do this where they like go to the slash users endpoint and they might send through like new password and then some other data on top of that. But to me, it just kind of breaks the paradigm. Changing a password just doesn't really fit this ORM paradigm. And so the way actions would work is you'd go to an endpoint that is, for example, actions slash change dash password, for example. Or you might also have things scoped as well. What do you call that? Namespaced. So in this case, rather than actions change password, it could be something like actions slash auth slash change password or user slash change password. And then you could send it, for example, the old password. And depending on whether you want to do confirmation on the front end or on the back end, you could do new password and then maybe like new password confirm. So this doesn't fit the paradigm of your classic sort of RESTful API, where you're a RESTful API that's using models. So the stuff that's really easy to automatically generate. This can't really be automatically generated. So in this case, you kind of need to do actions one by one. This is the sort of thing where if you just add a new thing to a table, if you just add a new model to a table, then you can pretty quickly go from that to getting up and running. And, with Vue Model, you can generate everything. Whereas with actions, usually you're doing a lot more back-end work as well. So one of the things I wanted was for schema.blue. So let me just open up schema.blue for those of you that haven't seen it. And I'm quickly just going to have to change the organization I'm on so I don't share something that I shouldn't. So currently, the projects only deal with this ORM type concept. So let me just go back here. Man, there's dogs barking like crazy outside right now. Yeah, something like this is fine. So basically, these are all of your modules or models, you might want to call them. And then these are all the fields, and you can put relationships in there as well. And then based on what you create here, so schema.blue is essentially your source of truth for your data structure. So rather than making it something like the database, essentially we put it in one spot and say, this is how the data needs to be structured. And then it would essentially work. This data structure could then be used anywhere. You can use it to migrate your database. You can use it to then generate models on your front end. You can use this data structure to generate models on another backend framework. So for example, maybe you're using Laravel on the backend, but you also want to use Python on the backend to do some analytics type stuff. Then you could generate your Python related models using this schema. So it's kind of like a way to put everything in one place and say, this is how my app is structured. And you can put it all in one spot. Then even if you wanted to change your database, you should easily be able to do that as well, or even change your entire backend. So let's just say you move from Laravel to a Node backend. You still got all your schemas set up, and then all you'd have to do is create some sort of a generator that generates all your models on your Node backend. So that's kind of the point of this. But as I mentioned before, it doesn't cover actions. It doesn't cover sort of other things that fall out of this paradigm. So I'm thinking of adding, I don't even know exactly what the UI would look like, maybe like a left-hand menu on the left side here that allows you to say, all right, these are my actions as well. So actually maybe it would be like a tabs up here. One of them would be modules or ORM or whatever, and another one would be actions. And then you'd be able to click on here and then add a new action. And then that action would generate on the front end for you. So let's have a look at some of the code for what this might look like. Oh, and by the way, the actions are backend agnostic. So if you let's just say you wanted to move from Laravel to Node, and I know this isn't something you'd usually want to do, it just sort of helps illustrate the example. But if you wanted to move from a backend like Laravel to Node, then you could implement all of your ORM type stuff. And then all you'd have to do is kind of go through your actions one at a time and implement all of those actions. And you could essentially recreate your entire backend application by just implementing the spec. So this, to an extent, obviously we can't cover everything in schemas, but to an extent, you can kind of describe your entire spec of how your application works with something like this. Because most apps can be broken up like that. It's essentially, well, at least APIs for your application are essentially just what do the models look like, and what are all the other things that it can do? In my case, I call them, what are all the other actions? Okay, and by the way, another quick comment. This is mostly targeted at applications where your API and your front end are separate. So one of the cool things you can do with frameworks like, Ruby on Rails or Laravel is you can make it so that as you're serving up the HTML, you're also you're also injecting all the data. So at the end of the day, the user's just getting HTML and JavaScript. It doesn't have to do a whole bunch of other requests. And there's a really, that's kind of like if you were using Blade templates in Laravel. And that's really cool. The problem I found is when you start moving your application to other paradigms. So for example, if I want to have a mobile app that can work with my backend as well, that paradigm breaks. And now you end up having to make a whole new API. So this kind of cross-platform dream that I have of building applications, of being able to say, all right, now build this as an Electron app, as a mobile app, as a PWA, even as an app extension. You can't really do that when you're using that paradigm with Laravel. So in a lot of ways, I think it's easier to be able to use something like, and tools like Inertia and what's the other one? Livewire make this super easy, or even just something pure that uses Blade. But it does sort of restrict you into that sort of browser backend ecosystem, at least to the best of my knowledge. And then you need to put in a whole bunch of effort to then create an API. So, I really want to have this dream of being able to have a really, really nice connection between a backend API that anybody can consume and my front-end Vue applications. So if you can make that connection really, really strong, but still have the two detached, then you can open up your API to other developers, but still make it really easy to build flexible, gorgeous front-end applications. So that's what we're aiming for. And now I've got like a little, did I put in the README? No, I didn't put in the README. I've got like some markdown file here. Yeah, that shows what a lot of this would look like. And I wanted to give you an idea of how this is all going to work. Yeah, one of the first things I do is kind of create an example of an API. And this is what it might look like to get everything installed. So you still do, your app create. And then we're creating a API requester here. So basically, we're using ret, which is kind of like fetch, but it's sort of a lot more expressive. So imagine that this is just fetch, but then you can say like .url. So this is what I want my URL to be. .options. So what do I want to pass through to fetch? We want to say credentials include. And basically this builds up, kind of like most of you are probably used to using Axios. This is kind of like building up an Axios instance. It's getting everything prepared, and all of our requests going forward are going to use this requester. So we do that, we set that up. We set it up with our bearer token. This is an example of where you might just have a token in local storage. We add that to our request, and then we return it. So whenever we want to make, every time we do a request, essentially this function is going to get called. And even though async isn't being used here, I often want this to be asynchronous, because rather than local storage, I'll often use IndexedDB. So you can do an await on that. Or if you want this to be cross-platform, then you might be using two providers for getting the token. And for your app, you might be using like an SQL database in order to get your API token. But for the web, you might be using local storage or IndexedDB. So that's why I make this async, because there's many situations where you actually have to do like an await here. You can't await local storage, but you can IndexedDB. All right, so now that we've got that, we go, essentially, rather than having VueAction only work with something like Laravel, we want it to work with any backend. Or really, if you wanted to, you could also just run JavaScript. So all of your JavaScript, you could have JavaScript actions that run with VueAction as well, which I think is kind of a weird thing to do. You just write the JavaScript. I don't know, but maybe you want to run background tasks using... what's it called? Web. Geez, I've forgotten. But basically, there's this API you can use in JavaScript that essentially runs it in the background. And there's cool stuff you can do where you can like run JavaScript in the background, even when your phone has exited the application. So there's cool little things you can do like that. So maybe you create an implementation for that as well. I don't know, but this means we can say, all right, let's create a version of this for Laravel, for Strapi, like kind of a basic Node one. And then, people across your team can all get used to using the same API. So everybody kind of gets on board with using VueAction. And then even if you're using different backends, like maybe you use Supabase for some apps where you want to build quickly, and Laravel for apps when you want stuff to be a little bit more robust and you want more sort of, flexibility in your ecosystem. So in that case, I bet you I'm going to get like a lot of kickback for saying that. But in that case, you'd be able to then just, rather than create Laravel action, which I'm importing here from a library. So you would have a library. By the way, none of this is available yet. I'm currently working on it. You'd have a library called create Laravel action. And you might have one called create, what would you call it? Create Strapi action, or create Supabase action that's got their sort of own implementation for this. Okay, so you created that. Next thing we have here is we're setting up VueAction itself. So we're saying create VueAction here, and we want it to be flexible enough to have multiple drivers. So let's just say you had two backends, two Laravel backends. You might have your core API, and then you might have, for example, I don't know, some micro API, whatever you want to call it. So in that case, you would then have another Laravel action here. So you create another implementation, you create another version of that. and you would call this one, you give it a name of micro API. And now that you've got both of these set up, and your create API requester would probably be different for this one. And we say like the Laravel micro, for example. And then the drivers, both of them would have the same driver in this case, which is the Laravel implementation. But you could have like a Laravel backend, and you could have a backend for something else like Strappy. So maybe, for example, we call this, maybe for some reason you have a Laravel API and a Strappy API. Perhaps you're moving from one framework to another. So we call this Strappy API. And now we have the ability to use both of them. Strappy implementation. And then in this case, you could then say the default is core API, and then later on, you could then swap out your default for Strappy API. And that just means when you use VueAction, by default, it's going to use whatever you've got here. So that matches up with the driver. That's what it uses by default. But then if you want to, whilst you're using it, you can also say, hey, by the way, in this instance, I actually want to use the Strappy API. So it's really easy to kind of switch between the two. This is a common pattern in the Laravel ecosystem that I've stolen. I'm pretty sure other ecosystems would be doing this as well, where you got a default driver, but then whilst, at the point where you're using it, you can then decide to use a different driver. Okay, then we say app.use, VueAction, and then that's all we have to do. It's sort of all set and ready to use. And this is an example of an actual action itself now. So you might say, for example, change password is the name of the action. It uses action, which I probably should be importing here. So that would be like import action from VueAction. That would be at VueAction/core, I believe. And then this is basically the setup for that action. And then you can say, in order to use it, actually, no, first we'll move on to the next bit. So basically, in that example I gave before, change password, which in this case is the ID of the action, behind the scenes, it would then go to /users, it would go to /actions/change-password. And you can also add a namespace in here, which I probably show later on. And if you added a namespace of users, for example, so if I said namespace is equal to users, then it would do this. Right? So we're basically creating a universal language around how you run, basically just how you hit your backend to do stuff in your application. That's all that we're doing here. And I said backend, but it's not necessarily a backend. It could actually just be anything. It could even be, if you're in an Electron app, maybe the action actually, creates a file on the user's system. Maybe it does something, maybe you want to use actions to do something related with Bluetooth, but you want it to work across different platforms. So then what you could do is you could have a set of actions for working with Bluetooth with Electron, and a set of actions, and then you could swap that out between Electron and what's the other one? Cordova. It's not Cordova though. Capacitor. All right. So if I'm using a mobile app, I could then say, set the default to the mobile app implementation, the mobile app driver. But if it's an Electron app, use the Electron app driver. So you can do really cool stuff like that, where if you have to work with different APIs, then you could still use Laravel action the same way, but you just change the way that action ends up working. Okay, so then we've got payload and response. And another thing that I need to add back in here is options. But I'm going to add that in later on. So basically, we're adding typing to the payload and saying what we want our response to look like for that action. Okay, so in this case, it's basically the same as this example here. Change password. Maybe I should add the word action there. So these are the same. So we're basically saying here, yeah, we're just adding typing here. I'm just showing that you can essentially just add it in here into that interface. And then we come down here and we show that you can run it with composables or without composables. So I wanted actions to be able to work outside of the Vue paradigm. I often hit this problem in the past where I would build everything using the composition API, but there were just some small edge cases where I was outside of the composition API, so I couldn't use it. And in those cases, then you can just use something like what we've got here. So we've got this function called run action that we can pull out of VueAction. And this sort of shows what you get back in response. So you get your response, your validation errors, so everything you kind of need related to that action. And then you pass through the action that you want to run. In this case, change password action. Maybe I should do an import to show what that would look like. And that's going to come from maybe, yeah, for example, / change password action. And then you put in the payload. This would be fully typed. So since that is being passed through here, all right, so this is an object, and since that gets passed through there, it's got all of the information of those types, and therefore, if you were to basically do control space here, within there, new password would pop up. This is just a markdown file, so it doesn't work right now, but this means you get fully typed actions if you choose, or if you don't want to type them, you don't have to, and then that would just be typed to any or something like that. And then as the third parameter, you can say, well, what happens on success, on error, validation, blah, 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 so that we got all those hooks available to us as well. And here's an example with a composable. So this is what it would actually look like when you're using it in the real world. You get your action, you pass it through to use action, and then you just call run in order for it to run. And then you can imagine, for example, so that's not super realistic of what it would look like to use. I just wanted a very quick example here. Whereas in reality, you would have, for example, q-button, and then you could say loading is equal to change password action dot, probably running dot value is what I'd call that. And then you could say at click is equal to change password action dot run. So then we've got, to me, this is just as beautiful as I could possibly make it. And of course, as you can imagine, that would get imported. And in fact, I should probably just do that up here rather than restating it. I think it makes it look a little bit nicer. And you know what? Maybe we do actually make this a Vue example. So how about this? Let's go script lang equals ts, and then we'll say setup. I'm not getting, you don't get auto completion when you in Markdown. Import the action, set it up, and then we can say template here. And then I lay it out like this. Man, I'm so used to my linter doing all the work for me.
3, 2,
well,
1, move.
That's my phone telling me that I need to move because it's been half an hour. All right, so we better wrap up in a second here. And yeah, so that's what it would look like to use. It would be that straightforward to change the password, and then you would have a component, for example, for handling your errors. So you'd have, for example, validation errors or whatever you end up wanting to call that, errors, and then you'd say change password action dot validation errors dot value. So you'd pass all that down, and then standard errors like that. And then you would also have like an if statement on both of these. So you just say v if. And I can't remember what the API is. It's probably be like has validation errors dot value. And then maybe the same thing here as well for has standard errors. And then let's just kind of lay that out a little bit nicer. Cool. Yeah. So now we can really easily handle all of our errors. We have a loading spinner. If we really wanted to, we can also hook in here and say, for example, on
2,
error.
1, 4.
Yeah, oh, by the way, let me just talk about that because you guys are developers. You might find this interesting. And I should bring up my comments, actually. How do I bring up my YouTube comments on this thing? I'm pretty sure there's a way that you can do it. Give me a hot second. Just in case people have been saying things. So I got this app called Seconds. There we go. I can jump in there now. Yeah, I got this mobile app called Seconds, and it's usually used for workouts, but I actually use it for just getting my sort of life on track and making sure that, I do all the work that I need to get done. And what I was doing is an hour of work. I started off with 50 minutes work. So the aim is 5 hours a day, 50 minutes of work with a 2-minute break. And I do 3 sets of that, then I do a long break, and then I do 3 sets of that, and then I'd be done for the day. So it kind of looks like this. Let's go on this tangent. I think it'll be fun. So it'd be like 50 minutes work, and then it would be like a 2-minute break. So I do that many times, and then it would be a 60-minute break. And I'll either take a nap if I feel like I need it there, or go for a walk and sort of recharge. And that's essentially what my day looked like this here. And then I'd sort of do any other work that I needed to get done. But this is sort of the very focused work. I'm trying to see how much hyper-focused work can I get into my day where there are no distractions. And this is kind of like the best thing that I've come up with so far. And once I've done that much work, my brain's pretty much dead. And I'll do things like talking to people that I need to in meetings, or writing emails or whatever. But, when I've done a day like this, I am totally like screwed. My brain's done. So then I thought, let's try bumping this up to an hour. And I found that worked really well. So now I actually do 60 minutes for all of those. And I was able to essentially knock this one out, that sort of last set out. And now you get those first 3 where you're super ready and eager and early in the morning. You've had your coffee, and all your sleep pressure has been flushed out from the night's sleep before. Take your 60-minute break to recharge a bit, but you're never going to feel as good. Or at least for me, after that 60-minute break, I don't get these hours back. Once these hours are done, I will never feel that good again throughout the day. So then I basically wanted to narrow it down to just 2 more. So that was kind of the logic behind this. Let's just add 10 more minutes and then change this to just 2 at the end of the day. But now what I'm trying to do is something like this. 30 minutes work, and just a 1 minute and 30-second break in there. So it's basically work, super quick break. I might even just make that 1 minute work, and then a longer break. And I actually changed that to 7 minutes. So I'm kind of elongating my day, but trying to experiment with what gets the most out of my brain. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people don't have the luxury to do this, which sucks, because if more of us work this way, we get so much more done. There's this kind of culture still, there's this culture of, people feeling the pressure to sort of sit down and not be able to get up and take breaks throughout their work. Man, like I look back at the times where I used to work like that, and it was just so much less productive. Like, significantly, astronomically less productive than working in this way. So my day now kind of looks more like, whoop, did something wrong there. That is not working. Oh, it's because I'm getting 4 of them, and then it's presuming that that's the end of it. Okay, let's try this. That's what my day looks like now. This is the first time I'm trying this, so I'll give you guys an idea of if that ends up working or not. So, all right, anyway. By the way, I'm thinking about building an app for this. Some sort of an app that allows me to break up my work very easily. But then if this break ends up going for longer, or I break for 30 minutes and I'm like, you know what, I just want to get my work done. I'm feeling great. I've done like my mini workouts. I often do like 20-minute, half an hour workouts rather than longer workouts. And sometimes I'll do that and just think, man, I'm just ready to work again. So I want to build something that allows me to very easily kind of pause things, switch things around. Sometimes I'll do these 3 bits, and I'll just feel so amazing that, especially if I'm working on something that I really love, that I won't want to take my 60-minute break yet. So I want to build an app that allows me to essentially set up this structure and say, we're going to aim for the 5 hours of focused work every day, but we're going to essentially be able to manipulate this structure based on things that happen. So, Now, maybe my girlfriend comes home early from work and she wants to go to the shops. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? Let's do that. That'd be fun. Or often we want to go to the cafe or go for a swim at the beach. So in that case, we'll I want to be able to easily kind of break this up. Which, to be fair, the seconds app helps you break it up, but it doesn't help you rearrange it. So I can pause things really easily, but I can't say, today I want to take that 60-minute break and put it here, or I want to put it down here, or whatever. Yeah, so hopefully that's useful to you. This is how I currently work, and I find it to be really, really helpful. And it means that at the end of the day, I know that I've got my 5 hours done. I'm going to hit my pillow at the end of the day and just feel like it was a good day. All right, so that's that. Let's go back to, just close out of that. That might have been the most helpful part of this whole video. Yeah, so why have I got basic with composable again without... Oh no, yeah, that's right. Basic with composable. And we added a couple more of this in to sort of fill out the example here. And this is an example of namespaces, which I kind of touched on before, where you could say the namespace is auth, the ID is change password, and then you can decide what to do with that on the back end. So on the back end, in this case, I would say /auth/ change password. And I've been thinking of maybe making the namespace an array so that you can do / maybe it would be something like this. User, comma, auth. And then in the case of something like Laravel or a HTTP API, that would be using slashes like this. So it would be / the first thing in the array / the second thing. And that just allows more flexibility for the namespace. So it might also make it so that it can be, it can use multiple like that. In fact, let's do that. Let's do this. Let's say auth there. And we'll say nested namespace. And do it like this. Yeah, let's do that. Callbacks. So same thing, use action, and then once that action is done, we can just say, on success, on error, whatever. It's kind of like using the action the normal way. So that's the plan. And see this part that says persist at the bottom here? This is something else that I kind of need to figure out. So often when you've done an action, you'll always want to do the same thing. For example, changing something in the store. So maybe whenever an action is run, something changes in the store. And this is kind of the part that I'm going to try and work on today and figure out. Let's just do this. So I think I need to be able to type not only... Let me just get the typings here. Yeah, that's actually not fully typed because... Let me show you what I mean. Fully typed action object. I want to be able to add options as well. What was my reasoning behind that? Yeah, okay. So the payload gets sent to the, using a backend as an example, the payload gets sent to the backend. But what if I also want to say, hey, by the way, when this action is done, I want you to persist it to the store or not. So then you could say persist is a Boolean. And now the usage of that might look something like this. Const change password action is equal to use action. And then you would pass the action through here like that. And then we could say change password action dot run. And you would pass through the payload first. And then maybe the options are the second parameter, or the options are part of the nested in the second parameter. I think they'd be nested in the second parameter. So let's try and create a full example here. New password. And of course, you'd also need like old password. So let's do that as well. And it wouldn't be a Boolean. It would be a string, you ninny face, Luke. So new password is equal to, whatever. and then the old password is equal to whatever. So that's the payload part. And then next, rather than putting the options there, so the problem with my API that I need to think about here is if I make options the second place here in the parameters, then all the other stuff like on success needs to be in a third option. So you might have like, for example, on success here and your console.log success. But what about times when there's no options? So maybe it would actually be better to just nest options here. So you'd say, for example, options persist is equal to false. The only problem with that is it's not quite as sexy, I don't think. Because then you end up with an API that looks like this, whereas it's just a lot nicer to have an API that looks like that. Yeah, I don't... Maybe you put everything in an object. So what if we just... Actually, you know what? I think this is definitely going to look better. What if we just did this? Payload, if you've got a payload, which would be... Actually, let's go back and just steal all of that. It's the best way to do this, yeah. And we'd say here, that's our payload. And then we can say, these are our options. So the difference is options is stuff that might be used by the action on the front end. So for example, inserting stuff into the store. Anyway, I'll show more of an example of that in a second. But then like on success here, console.log. Yeah, I think this looks much better because there'll be situations where you got options, but you don't have a payload. There'll be situations where you don't have a payload or options, but you want to do an on success. So you're never actually going to require a first parameter there. So why not just put everything in one object? I think that API looks a lot better. So I think we'll do that. Let's just do this because I'm pedantic. Nice. Okay, that looks good. So now the other thing I want to be able to do is say, hey, every time this action is run, I want you to do something. So I also want to be able to say on success on the action object itself. And the only problem that I ran into before thinking through this is you got on success in the context of the composition API, and then you've got on success in the context of not the composition API. So how do you handle that? Do you just make it so that you can have two on success functions, one for the comp API and one for not? And I think that's what I'm going to land on. But then let's just say you've got on success and you do like a console.log success. And then you say, for example, setup, as if this were in script setup. And then you say like setup on success, console.log setup success. Now in this case, should both of these be logged? In other words, if you're in the composition API, should it call the basically base on success and the composition API version of on success? Or should you essentially just copy paste the two concepts in this case and just like write the code twice? I think you'd have to write the code twice. Yeah, let's think through this in the on. I don't know. That's going to take experimentation to sort of figure out. I think that this is the API that I'll end up going with for now. But now what you could do is we could say on success, change password is a really bad example. But then you could say like, obviously you wouldn't do this with a change password, but like user dot update or the problem is we want to be able to jump into the beginning of setup. So you'd have to do this. You'd have to say setup, and then you can accept as a parameter there on success. And then what we can do is we can say const user repo is equal to use repo and pass through the user. All right, imagining that we're using Pina ORM. And then we could say on success, user repo dot, I think you do like an insert in this case, and you would get the response back. And let's just imagine that response had the user, and you'd say user insert response dot data dot user, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And this is the challenges that I'm going to be working on today. And the idea is when this is done, if we get this implemented in schema.blue, a lot of this boilerplate would be written for you. So you could automatically have a lot of these actions sort of pre-generated to the best of, that they can be pre-generated. And then your job is just to come in here and then fill out the code. And then since schema.blue syncs with your editor, essentially you would add the action and straight away it would show up in your editor and you can go ahead and start writing the code for that action. Yeah, and one thing I'm thinking is if you had two implementations, one for JavaScript and one for the backend, even though JavaScript seems useless, it would actually be really useful if you were, gotta get my thoughts straight. It would be useful for prototyping. So if you're prototyping something for a potential client, you do everything, you build all of your actions just using plain JavaScript. And then when you're done, if the client says, yep, I want you to build this, then to switch from prototype to building a real app, all you have to do is essentially swap out those actions. So you just swap out the code that you have in your JavaScript, you essentially write the equivalent of that code on the back end, but the interface for the action could still look the same. So there's some really interesting things that you could start doing with this concept. You could even start building like fake jobs, like a job that which could be like a piece of JavaScript code that takes 4 seconds to run. And then when it's run, something happens. So there's some really cool little concepts we could do there. So before I finish up, I just wanted to give you an idea what the ecosystem is going to be here. So we've got view model. That's pretty much done. That was the hard part. When view model, it's still obviously got a bit of work to do. It's got an implementation for IndexedDB. So basically using your computer as a database, and it's got an implementation for Laravel Orion. So if you're using Laravel or using IndexedDB, you can use this. And I want to start adding it to things like Supabase and maybe Strapi as well. But basically any complex API is going to be able to create an implementation for view model. Even GraphQL, I think we might be able to do with view model as well. So that's the first thing. We got view model. Now I'm working on VueAction, which is going to be able to cover hitting your backend with, all of these sort of other scenarios. Another one I want to build though is Vue Listener or Vue Listen. I don't know exactly what to call this. And that's going to be for listening for things with something like WebSocket. And I'm thinking of creating 2 versions of this. One that's for listening to anything, but then maybe also one that's for listening to view model related stuff. So then you can say, for example, use listener, or you could call it like use model listener, and then you could pass through the user here, and then by default that would cover like create, update, and delete, and it would automatically update it in the store based on one of those events that's happened. Or you could come in here and then say, for example, what you want to listen for. So it might be, for example, just update. So maybe like update true. I don't know. Or maybe in that case, what you actually do is you have use model listener, and then you could also have other ones like use model remove listener, use model update listener. So if you do want to get more specific, you can, but then you got use model listener, which essentially keeps that entire thing in sync. So man, I'm gonna keep this. This is a really good idea. I didn't even think of that about that before. So we're gonna put that in the used lister part of my Obsidian doc. Let me just open that up. Blue standard ecosystem. Yeah, view listener. So what if we had view model listener as well? That'd be wicked. Whoops. So 2 libraries, view listener and view model listener, maybe something like that. Yeah, and then maybe you have the ability to add scopes as well. So maybe like adding scopes to view model listener. And then you can listen to all of that. We'll also add create in there as well. Use model create listener. And then you would have use listen, which is kind of like a more encompassing one. Maybe I even need a new heading here. What's that? That's a double. View model listener. So let's get rid of that. And just do that. There's a couple of comments of things that I'm thinking of building. Yeah, to me, this is like, this is my dream ecosystem that I want built. If I can get all of this stuff done, that's kind of like, I feel like this is going to be my thing that I leave behind in life, building out my blue standard ecosystem. Who knows? Maybe AI is going to make all this redundant, but AI is going to make most things redundant. So that's fine. So yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this stream. Just sort of a quick update of what I'm working on, a few thoughts here and there. Yeah, let me know in the comments if you like this kind of thing, but hopefully I can come back with more, kind of more rounded videos soon. I'm actually, that's probably not going to happen for a while because I am so focused on the ecosystem right now. And then when the ecosystem's feeling more robust, I'll start doing more videos. So for example, once view model has kind of standardized a little bit more, then I'll do a whole video series showing you how to build apps using view model. And that'll be like a more professional video series where everything's kind of nicely cut and edited. And you'll be able to just kind of run through that and then get up to speed on view model really quickly. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this one. I enjoyed making it. It was nice to do something just kind of chill. And see you all next time.